Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Novolis, your host. And we're always testing out some new equipment and everything like that. So those on video, we've got some new lighting here in the studio that we are playing with, and we'll see what that means and how that works. But you on the radio at Liberty Works Radio Network and at Soaring Eagle, you don't care. You don't get the opportunity to see my smiling face and just those bright eyes shining back at you. But delighted when you do go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net and you take the opportunity to not only listen to the podcasts that are there and available in the archives, but that you also take that time to watch the video presentation if you so choose. If not, you know what? Go and download the podcast, stick it on your device, and listen to it as it makes sense to you. Wonderful. But that's all fun and dandy. But the interesting aspect of what I'd like to talk to you about today is something that has bothered me since the time that I came to a clear biblical understanding of what salvation in Jesus means and how that is important not only to one's personal soul and eternity, but what does that mean in relationship to all of mankind for good governance and life, every aspect of life. So I titled today's program the Theology Comparisons. And the theological comparisons that I wanted to look at were and are that of the present and what we see in the majority. I would say 90+% of the churches and teaching in America today. And what does that mean in relationship to what's happening in governance versus, and in comparatively to that which established the foundation of this nation? There are a couple elements that pressed me into wanting to do this comparison today. In particular is where I've been going with Lo Nang in studying the law, the complete law, the whole constitutional perspective of covenant relationship and what that means, as it is greater than just a biblical point of view. It is that extensible point into every aspect of our lives. Wonderful. I've had that position for many, many years. In addition to that, is watching what's happening with the full-blown evil of the Democrats coming out without any question. And that was really exemplified again in the climate change summit insanity on the Communist News Network, or some people call the Clinton News Network, but it's really the Communist News Network the other night. I think it was back on Wednesday night. And in that, you had a number of the people who want to get rid of our foundational perspectives of our republic, including that of the Electoral College that I just briefly mentioned last week. And I'm not going to get into the depth of that either. Then you have the absolute spewing of evil, both from Kamala Harris and the Bernie Sanders, in that they're 100% on continued murder of the infant, the infanticide, the unborn in particular, and that, as we heard from Bernie, that he is, and I'm wondering, side note, I don't know what this really means, but I'm wondering how much Bill Gates is contributing to his campaign, because Bernie is of the like mind of Bill Gates and wants population control. Now, we know that in studying economics, that was I think it was Ricardo, I think that's his name, that economist who was a proponent of same thing, population control. And there was a movement within the whole socialist, Fabian, and extended environment on that population control. And then when you hear the AOC and all of the others that are jumping up and down that, we're on this end of Earth within the next 12, 15 years, and so on and so forth, one has to look at it that, first off, they can't predict that because everything operates according to God's timeline. So that's very interesting. Then the other thing that really captured me, that Kath and I were watching an interview of Candace Owens with her, I think it's her husband now. I do think that they got married, and they were going through all of the different things and, so on and so forth. A very interesting interview. I highly recommend that you take the opportunity to watch it when you get some time out there on YouTube, and a replay of the Candace Owens show and that. But what struck me very, very strongly is that Candace, to her credit, dropped out of college when she understood that it was nothing but a place of brainwashing, of trying to change the mind of those and to then take and impact the lives of those that did not agree with the ideologies within the greater university system. And when I've had definite conversations with you about the systemic problems of all of that in the past. One thing that was very interesting when Candace was talking about some of the things that she learned from her now new husband and all of that was about hunting and what that meant for all of that, and watch the interview. But what I wanted to draw on is a statement that she made relative to growing up in Connecticut, and that nobody hunts in Connecticut. No, firearms and all of that. And as we know, the majority of now the eastern seaboard states are very anti-gun. From the governmental perspective, universities and education, so on and so forth. Yet, there is theological reasoning that all of that is what it is. And it comes down to modern theology having that leftist bent, even within the so-called conservative churches, even within the so-called, I don't know, what do you want to, every name that you can think of out there for churches that are supposed to be biblically sound and denominations that are biblically sound. Now, we know that there are many denominations and churches out there that are, quite frankly, the epitome of evil and insanity and misinterpretation and all of that. All of those major denominations that are part of the National Council of Churches. We've had that conversation in past times as well. And I think that it's worth looking in the reference on what I will put up and have many times. But I doubt that any of you have looked at it. Maybe some, I take that back, but I do have those doubts because of the questions I had. Do we have to read this stuff, Tom? Well, the answer is I sure do expect. Why would I put a reference there, except for the fact that I want you to know that I have some sense of understanding about these things. But and additionally is don't take my word for it. Read it for yourself. Study it for yourself. So when I said in the promo that where I find America today, and I said us, the U.S. today, is no different than the time of Judges, where everybody's doing what seems right in their own eyes. And it's interesting because that is inclusive of all of the various pastors that are out there that are teaching the Bible only. And usually when they're teaching the Bible only, They're only teaching the salvation message and those things that wrap around that piece of it, which is important. We have to have that. And I'm not saying anything negative about that. But when you only do that, then you're doing what Paul said should not happen, and all you're doing is pouring milk out there, no different than when there was all the insanity with milk, and the farmers or dairymen were dumping it out by the hundreds and thousands of gallons. So that's a lot of spilt milk. And when you have spilt milk, it doesn't do anything different than water and just makes the ground saturated. And the worst part about spilt milk is that once it lays there and soaks into the ground, it gets taken over by bacteria, and it doesn't turn necessarily into cheese. It sours. It sours. So our modern theological position from hundreds and almost since the 70s studying this in our history, our foundation, the Reformation, and the application of biblical truth, it just comes down to where we are today in our political stand, no different than all that is in the Old Testament. And I think that's why many of the large denominations that are not in the National Council of Churches, but that are the evangelicals, if you will, they don't go anywhere really near the Old Testament unless they can tie it to what they think of their eschatology in Revelations, and that, you know, you better go get on your rooftop because Jesus is coming back in the next 30 seconds. And, a lot of those predictions have been missed. And, they only use Old Testament referencing for looking at Revelations and all of that. Instead of, and here's the point, and what do we got, 2 minutes, Kath? We got 2.5 minutes. Getting better at that. And actually, Kathy keeps really great time and lets me know where we are on the clock, as you all know that. So, but what it comes down to, from the political historical reference that we're going to get into in the second segment, again, Soaring Eagle Radio, you got to go look at the podcast at samueladamsreturns.net, or, you know, what we have posted in the videos. And in these last 2 minutes, the point is that modern theology is so wrapped up in the rapture that they have let good governance and the implication and the application of biblical truth go to hell in a handbasket, or better, they have allowed the milk of the scripture, the milk of the gospel, to sour, because they don't know how to make cheese and they don't know how to make ice cream. Or they're saying that those diets of that are not good for you, they're not right for you. So all of a sudden they become modern dietitians in a theological formation that takes and allows you to miss out on the truth and fact of things. And the truth and fact is that if we go back to the book of Judges, if we go back to the Old Testament, if we look at Israel having the very presence of God before them, and at what point in time was that rejected? And at what point in time were all the instruments that were there before them in the time of Judges? Right after Joshua and Caleb die. Think about that. Think about how quickly. And that's true within the context of the modern church. And we'll cover that in the next segment as well, because I'm also going to take you in the next segment and in the third segment to talk about Connecticut, to talk about that fundamental theological difference that is there in what Sam Adams and the Anti-federalists clearly understood because of the chaplains and clergy in the Revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Got it right, and this is Tom Novolish, your host, and so delighted that you are here with me. And always in this segment is, you know what? Go look at the menu items at Liberty Works Radio Network. Check out all those other hosts and hostesses, the live programming that is there during the week, and also, hit that donate button. And once again, I didn't mention in the first segment, I will in the third, is that Soaring Eagle Radio is really an interesting place, an interesting ministry down there in Lima, Ohio, and I'm very delighted to be part of that as well. I'm also going to do a couple little pitches here, is that, I keep talking about the books. They're there at samueladamsreturns.net at the homepage. I really appreciate if you help support what we're doing, and that would be with buying a book. And then also, which I think is really a lot of fun, I would ask you to go to pepperlicious.com. We have a unique and culinary hot pepper experience for all of those that are interested in that, and it is what, Kath? PEPER dash. Oh, I see. I got the spelling. There's too many P's in there. Is that like pickle peppers? Peppers. Sorry, pickled peppers. See, you never get it right. So it is pepper-licious.com. So that's PEPPER-LISCIOUS.com. I should write this stuff down. I get it better. So pepperlicious.com. We have some very delightful specialty hot peppers, Peruvian type of pepper and all of that. So what's that got to do with the theological position of now and then, the founding of the nation? Well, I'll tell you what, if they had the hot peppers, they'd be chomping on them because it was all about hot pepper. So where I want to take you right now in relationship to going back to what Candace Owen kind of mentioned relative to no hunting, or they're not modern in their hunting ideas or knowing about it much in Connecticut. That's really amazing to me because I am behind in relationship to the chaplains and clergy of the Revolution and getting all of the remainder of those videos up. There's been so much happening. But I am going to pick up with this chapter 31. Chapter 31 is a minister out of Connecticut. And until I really started reading and understanding some of the history of this pastor who had, think about this for all of you Christians out there, evangelicals, that this particular pastor at the time of the Revolution had a megachurch. He had a church that had 2,000 souls in that church. Now that's large in a lot of communities even today. But at that time, in Connecticut, that would be a megachurch. And not only that, what we learn in history, and this is where the likes of Candace Owen, many of the other pundits out there, do not know and understand our foundational truths to the extent that they talk about conservatism without the full context of understanding constitutionalism as intended and derived by our founders. At least they don't talk about it on their radio and TV programs to the extent that it's not about your whims. It's not about being in the days of judges where everybody has their own ideas. That's what's gotten us in trouble. You see, our founders were against tolerance. They were against tolerance of ill religion. They were against tolerance of ill political ideologies because they knew that they would corrupt what they were intending for our nation. So when you take that into consideration, I have to, and on this program for these remaining minutes of this segment and into the third segment, I have to talk about this particular chapter in the Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution. And that is one of the menu items at samueladamsreturns.net. And this is chapter 31, and this is about Cotton Mather Smith. And the topics in here are that he was a teacher among Indians. He studied theology. He settled in Sharon, Connecticut. His influence of the clergy and Connecticut in bringing about the revolution. This is what's missed out there. And so this is the big modern theological difference, is that these major mega pastors, and including the mega church here in Northeast Ohio area that I reference, they don't feel there should be any political influence. There shouldn't be any influence in government and governance. And you have that across the nation. And within the cemeteries, seminaries that are out there, or the Bible colleges, or the Bible, cesspools, is that they only are spilling milk. They're not getting to the meat that is necessary for the whole person, a whole society, and therefore what you have is, what you have is what happened to Israel and other nations when they do not understand the full context of the scriptures and implementing that within society and governance. Well, what we have in this chapter is that the clergy of Connecticut was very foundational, as such as the clergy of Massachusetts, in bringing about the revolution, let alone supporting it. Then his views, that is Cotton Mather Smith's views of the struggle between the colonies and the mother country, the part he took in it, patriotism of his congregation. He's made the chaplain and marches to Ticonderoga. He served well. His devotion to the sick. He's seized with camp fever, almost dies. He has to go home. The invasion by Burgoyne. His sermon just before the final victory at Saratoga. And then the thrilling scene about that. And then his character and his death. That's a lot to slam in here. And I'm going to just go through all of the high points with my commentary. Obviously, you're not going to get away without my commentary in here. But this guy was amazing. So here's his heritage. His father was the grandson of Reverend Henry Smith. His mother, the granddaughter of Increase Mathers. So right there, you're getting a foundational Puritan Congregationalists. And Congregationalists have gone to the cesspool of the planet for the most part, quite frankly. I'm sorry to say that. Compared to this and our history and the history of what was there from their Puritan roots. So Cotton Mather Smith graduated at Yale in 1751. He went to Hatfield for a while, where he made a public profession of religion and immediately turned his attention to the ministry. Before he finished his course in theological studies, he accepted an invitation to take charge of a school among the Indians in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. Dr. Sprague, in his Annals of the American Pulpit, which, every pastor out there now, every evangelical pastor, I'm telling you, you guys have no clue of truth in America, especially those who come from foreign countries in our modern time and become dual citizens and then don't understand these truths. But the Annals of the American Pulpit is an amazing read. And if that's not taught and you're not reading that, pastors, that's why you're missing it. So he ended up going there. He engaged in this work with the Indians with great zeal, and by his amenable and winning manners, and especially by mingling with the Indians in their athletic sports, he acquired a commanding influence over them and brought them entirely within his control. He labored for them with untiring diligence and with corresponding success, and became a proficient in their language, while imparting to them a knowledge of his own. After completing this engagement, he returned to Hatfield and resumed his theological studies. He was licensed to preach in 1753, and 2 years after that, he settled over the church of Sharon, Connecticut, and continued its pastor through a long and useful life. A distinguished descendant of Reverend Smith, in furnishing me, that means the author, Mr. Headley, the materials for this sketch of Mr. Smith, in the prefaces them, that relative prefaces them with such forcible and true remarks on, quote, the influence of the clergy of Connecticut in making that little state take the gallant stand she did in the Revolution, end quote. Okay, it's the clergy that he quotes, and Headley brings that whole thing into here. And he goes here and he calls that this relative said that, quote, the Laodicean of the Confederation, since that small as she was, she furnished 31,600 troops, or 5,000 more than Virginia and Pennsylvania combined, and far more than New York. Connecticut. So Candace Owens and all of Connecticut don't understand their history when it comes to firearms, guns, hunting, and what it means in that patriotic duty is that that small state furnished 31,600 troops, and which was 5,000 more than Virginia and Pennsylvania combined, and far more than New York. What a history right there. And that although she had 100 miles of exposed seacoast, only 3 plundering expeditions by the British ever contaminated her soil, and these made no permanent occupation. They were gallant at Bunker Hill. They covered the retreat, their efforts in capturing Ticonderoga with more than 200 cannon that provided of such a vital importance to the American cause in the siege of Boston. Of her brave spirits, such as Knowlton and Hale and other early martyrs to liberty, so well calculated to be aroused her energy and kindle her heroism, he says, and this relative, but the most powerful element of the revolutionary strength in Connecticut was her congregational clergy, and the opinion may be expressed without fear of the contradiction that to no class or order of men in the country so much indebted for its national independence. Had they preached a slavish and cowardly submission to the royal will, had they declared it to be the first of the duties to honor the king, we should today have been royal colonists of the British crown. Let me finish off this last minute in this, is that the pastors today, by misquoting Romans, 12 and 13, if you will, in misquoting that and messing up the whole understanding of that, are preaching slavishness to the government. And that is not what foundationally is true or what these pastors held to. They preached liberty in Jesus. They preached liberty against tyranny and despotism. And we can have that in government. We can have it in local government. We can have it in school districts. We sure have it at the national level. We can have it at the state level. And that's what these pastors stood up against. That's what Sam Adams, as an anti-federalist, warned against. And that's what all the anti-federalists warned against, such that we'll come back in the third segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They got it right. And this, again, is Tom Navolis, your host. And for those that are rejoining us with Soaring Eagle, I got to tell you, you know what? You missed that segment, that last segment. So you're going to have to go back to those archives at samueladamsreturns.net and either listen to the podcast in total or take and enjoy the video as well. Because Kathy goes, during the break, she goes, "Did you jump through the camera at them?" You know, there's times that I get expressive, and my dad always says when he watches, the program on his big screen that there are those moments where it seems like I'm coming through that camera right after you. And I did some of that in the last segment, and maybe I'll end up doing it because this is so important to understand the theological differences between the foundation of this nation and the Tory cowardness that we have inside 90+% of the churches in America today. I wanted to, for those that have not listened to that last segment, get back to you, and excuse me for everybody else that's been on here, is that in talking about our good friend here, Cotton Mather Smith, and his family was talking and saying that it was the churches and the pastors and Cotton Mather Smith in particular that really drove home some things. And here's a statement that here is important. Quote, that the most powerful element of revolutionary strength in Connecticut was her congregational clergy. And the opinion may be expressed without fear of contradiction that to no class or order of men is the country so much indebted for its national independence than that clergy. It was the clergy, okay? The clergy. Where are you, evangelical pastors? I know you are still subjects of the crown. And it says here, had they preached a slavish and cowardly submission, slavish and cowardly, bad theology, Romans 12 and 13, if they had preached that to the royal will, a slavish and cowardly submission to the royal will, had they declared it to be the first of duties to honor the king, we should today have been royal colonists of the British influence. It continues for the benefit of all. The immense influence of the clergy for the first century and a half is alike honorable to them and to the people. Most of them who first emigrated into the country were gentlemen of family and station and had good estates, which they freely spent in assisting their poor brethren and parishioners in the numerous difficulties of making new settlements. They possessed a great portion of the literature of the colony and were instructors of the flower of its youth. We don't get that within a lot of pastors today because they're uneducated in the fullness of governance. They're uneducated in the fullness of the context of Reformation truth to the extent that they can't teach anything except the spilt milk that I talked about in the first segment. Milk is important, never denying that. But the gospel is more full. That's why in Judges, when they had the 10 Commandments before them, what happened? They always needed a judge. And they left the King of Heaven somewhere. Anyway. So, they had given a striking evidence of their integrity and self-denial in emigrating from their pleasant homes into this distant land for the sake of religious liberty, and their people revered them as exiles and fellow sufferers for the dearest cause. So you know what? Those pastors, modern pastors that have now moved to America, I don't know why they did it. But this was good reasons to do it for religious liberty and to fight for what matters in liberty going on. No wonder that all these circumstances combine to give them an uncommon influence over their hearers of every rank and character. Boy, we have that today. I mean, some of these some of the big churches, they got 5, 6, 10,000 people that rotate through 3 services, even those that have 1, 2,000, and then they have the TV and radio ministries that reach thousands more. Influence over their hearers of every rank and character. No wonder that the governors and magistrates and leading men of the land deemed them worthy of all honor. Not necessarily true today. You may have some political people out there or, rich people that look to certain pastors and go, oh, wow, give them whatever. But not like then. Not like then. It was because they were speaking the liberty of the Word of God in its full context, not just the milk. They were consulted by the legislature in all affairs of consequence, civil and religious, and with civilians were appointed on committees to advise and assist them in the most delicate and important concerns of the Commonwealth. Now, pastors stay away from that. They don't get in. They're not asked for anything. As a matter of fact, all you get is a bunch of psychobabble people that are out there, especially when it comes to the stuff that's going on in Ohio in particular. I can speak to because I'm on that board of mental health and recovery services. So the shooting down here in Dayton, there's no real pastors being asked. And the ones that are a bunch of psychobabblers themselves, and they don't take and understand the constitutionalism and truth, and they don't preach about sin and the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, and it's not in our schools. And it's not where it should be in our society. Therefore, what we have is that at that time, they were consulted by legislature, they were consulted by governors and magistrates, they were consulted in affairs of consequence, civil and religious. And they were appointed to committees to advise. Really? Majority of pastors that I know that are modern evangelicals run away from that. So I have to say that although there may be a number of those pastors that go meet with President Trump, some folks have issues with some of them, maybe from their core theological positions or whatever, but at least they're doing this. They're doing what the foundational pastors did. They participated and they were advisors. With but little variation, in this continued down to the epoch of the Revolution, and in all the preparatory movements toward the mighty struggle, it was the influence of her clergy more than anything else that caused the colony of Connecticut to act in one united and harmonious phalanx. Now Connecticut is all about gun control, homosexuality, what else? Abortion, all of the other civil and religious evils, instead of being this phalanx of liberty, acting united and harmonious for liberty, instead they're doing it for evil. To the tyrannical edicts of the throne and the bitter and barbarous threats of the lords and bishops in the English Parliament, they responded from every pulpit. Here's the quote: "Down with Amalek, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. Be strong that ye be not servants. Quit yourself like men and fight." All we hear out of the modern theological positions within the context of the evangelical churches is turn the other cheek. You on the radio can't see me. I'm turning the other cheek. Turn the other cheek and allow evil to reign so that Jesus can come? The rapture will happen? No, God's got it already predetermined and all that. We're supposed to live and we're supposed to fight, and that's what these guys were talking about. Quit yourselves like men. That means be a man. Be a man and learn how to fight and stand up against evil and tyranny right in your own community, right in your own school district, right in your own board of mental health, right in all of it. That's what you need to do. Be a man. I don't know how to do that. I just have to bow down and drink milk and let it spill all down the front of my shirt and pants. It was owing to the clergy that New England was not infested with Tories like other providences. Remember, there's a pastor out there that says, I'm still a subject of the crown. Wow. Tories. That's what 90% of the pastors are out there, because they won't stand up against tyranny. They won't stand up against abortion. They won't stand up against homosexuality. They won't stand up. But they'll preach, which is necessary, the milk of the gospel. But they have no clue on how to implement the whole context of the scripture. Of the 20 years of his parochial life, filled up with usefulness, of his labors abundantly blessed, of his kindly charities and devotions to the interests of his people, the limits of this sketch will not allow me to speak. As an instance of his self-sacrificing spirit, it is necessary only to mention that once, when the smallpox devastated his parish, he never took off his clothes for nearly 3 weeks. So untiring was his attendance on the sick. You know what? Some senior pastors in churches, hey, junior pastor, you go see the sick. You go do this. You go do that. Anyway, the crisis which the Battle of Lexington precipitated had long been foreseen by Mr. Smith. He had watched the slow gathering of the clouds on the political horizon and knew what they portended. Feeling that a struggle between the colonies and mother country was inevitable, he was not one of those who believed it would result simply in redress of grievances and a restoration of the old relations. He knew the first resort to arms would rouse the old Puritan blood. Where's that Puritan blood? To a pitch of excitement that would make the restraints of loyalty like threads of gossamer. And he therefore, for a long time previous to it, by his pen, in private conversations, and in the pulpit, gradually educated his congregation into the belief that when the colony should rise in defense of their rights, nothing short of total separation, national independence must be looked for. Fearful as such an issue seemed, he did not speak of it despondently, but with high courage and firm faith. He was a writer. He was a pastor. He wrote songs. He wrote poems. There's so much more. You're going to have to go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net to the Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution there in the menu. And this chapter will be a new chapter that's up there. It's taking me time to get all of these done. But this is chapter 31, Cotton Mather Smith. There's so much more that I want to tell you that differentiates the limp-wristed Tory theology of modern evangelicalism in relationship to that which was during our foundational period. That was from the pulpits understanding the truths. Again, the Tories were out there and the Episcopalians were out there preaching their insanity and bowing down to the tyranny of the king. But truth prevailed through the Puritan Congregationalist like this. There's a few of them out there. You know, Dr. Spalding's out there, Doug Wilson, There's a bunch of other folks that are in that genre, but Sam Adams had it nailed. And his truths that he understood, which he spoke about, had a biblical context all the time. And so did the Anti-Federalists understand it as well. We'll see you next week.